Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol. Nitai Gaura Hari Bol. Gaura Premanande Hari Hari Gaura. Jayom Vishnupada Paramahamsa Parivrajacharya Stottara Shata Shishrimad Divine Grace Laisi Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Gaura Premanande. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. So Hare Krishna. Thank you for coming to Srimad Bhagavatam class. Chitananda Prabhu is not feeling so well today, so he asked for replacement. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. We are continuing reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto number 5, Chapter 2, Text 2. And this text is again in prose, so we will not have it on the board, but I will just read through. Sacha kadachit pitriloka kama suravara vanita kridachala dronyam bhagavantam vishvasrijam patim abritta parijaryo pakarana atmaikargyena tapasvi aradhyayam pabhuvam. So we can do the word for word translation together. Saha, he, King Agnidra. Cha, also. Kadachit, once upon a time. Pitriloka, the Pitriloka planet. Kamaha, desiring. Suravara, of the great demigods. Vanita, the women. Akrida, the place of pastimes. Achaladronyam, in one valley of the Mandara hill. Bhagavantam, unto the most powerful Lord Brahma. Vishvasrijam, of personalities who have created this universe. Patim, the master. Abrita, having collected. Parijarya upakaranaha, ingredients for worship. Atma, of the mind. Eka argyena, with full attention. Tapasvi, one who executes austerity. Aradhayam Bhabhuva became engaged in worshipping. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Desiring to get a perfect son and become an inhabitant of Pitriloka, Maharaj Agnidra once worshipped Lord Brahma, the master of those in charge of material creation. He went to a valley of Mandara hill, where the damsels of the heavenly planets come down to stroll. There he collected garden flowers and other necessary paraphernalia, and then engaged in severe austerities and worship. Please repeat. Desiring to get a perfect son and become an inhabitant of Pitriloka, Maharaj Agnidra once worshipped Lord Brahma, the master of those in charge of material creation. He went to a valley of Mandara hill, where the damsels of the heavenly planets come down to stroll. There he collected garden flowers and other necessary paraphernalia, and then engaged in severe austerities and worship. It's a long purport, but you all have phones, makes it easier. The king, purport by Srila Prabhupada. The king became Pitriloka Kama, or desirous of being transferred to the planet named Pitriloka. Pitriloka is mentioned in Bhagavad Gita. Yanti Deva Brata Devan Pitrin Yanti Pitri Vrataha. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. To go to this planet, one needs very good sons who can make offerings to Lord Vishnu and then offer the remnants to their forefathers. The purpose of the Shraddha ceremony is to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Vishnu, so that after pleasing him, one may offer prasad to one's forefathers and in this way make them happy. The inhabitants of Pitriloka are generally men of the Karma Kandiya, or fruitive activities category, who have been transferred there because of their pious activities. They can stay there as long as their descendants offer them Vishnu Prasad. Everyone in heavenly planets such as Pitriloka, however, must return to earth after exhausting the effects of his pious acts. As confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 9.21, Kshine Punye Martya Lokam Vishanti. Persons who perform pious acts are transferred to higher planets, but when the effects of their pious acts are over, they are again transferred to earth. Since Maharaj Priyavrata was a great devotee, how could he have begotten a son who desired to be transferred to Pitriloka? Lord Krishna says, Pitrin Yanti Pitri Vrataha. Persons who desire to go to Pitriloka are transferred there. Similarly, Yanti Mat Yajinopi Mam. Persons who desire to be transferred to the spiritual planets, Vaikuntha Lokas, can also go there. Since Maharaj Agnidra was the son of a Vaishnava, he could have desired to be transferred to the spiritual world, Vaikuntha Loka. Why, then, did he desire to be transferred to Pitriloka? In answer to this, Goswami Giridhar, one of the Bhagavatam commentators, remarks that Agnidra was born when Maharaj Priyavrata was infatuated by lusty desires. This may be accepted as a fact, because sons are begotten with different mentalities, according to the time of their conception. According to the Vedic system, therefore, before a child is conceived, the Garbhadhana Samskar is performed. This ceremony molds the mentality of the father in such a way that when he plants his seed in the womb of his wife, he will beget a child whose mind will be completely saturated with a devotional attitude. At the present moment, however, there are no such Garbhadhana Samskaras, and therefore people generally have a lusty attitude when they beget children. Especially in this age of Kali, there are no Garbhadhana ceremonies. Everyone enjoys sex with his wife like a cat or dog. Therefore, according to Shastric injunctions, almost all the people of this age belong to the Shudra category. Of course, although Maharaj Agnidra had a desire to be transferred to Pitriloka, this does not mean that his mentality was that of a Shudra. He was a Kshatriya. Maharaj Agnidra desired to be transferred to Pitriloka, and therefore he needed a wife, because anyone desiring to be transferred to Pitriloka must leave behind a good son to offer yearly pinda, or prasad from Lord Vishnu. To have a good son, Maharaj Agnidra wanted a wife from a family of demigods. Therefore, he went to Mandara Hill, where the women of the demigods generally come to worship Lord Brahma. In Bhagavad Gita 4.12 it is said, Kankshanta karmanam siddhim yajanta iha devataha. Materialists who want quick results in the material world worship demigods. This is also confirmed in Srimad Bhagavatam. Shri Aishwarya Prajep Shavaha. Those who desire beautiful wives, substantial wealth, and many sons worship the demigods. But an intelligent devotee, instead of being entangled by the happiness of this material world in the form of a beautiful wife, material opulence and children, desires to be immediately transferred back home, back to Godhead. Thus he worships the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vishnu. Om Jnanatirandhasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Sri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam. Vandehang Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavangscha Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatang Vitang Tvang Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Shri Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakha Nvitangscha. He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyevacha patitanam bhavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pasyatyadesha Tarine. Desiring to get a perfect son and become an inhabitant of Pitri-loka, Maharaj Agnidra once worshipped Lord Brahma, the master of those in charge of material creation. He went to a valley of Mandara hill, where the damsels of the heavenly planets come down to stroll. There he collected garden flowers and other necessary paraphernalia, and then engaged in severe austerities and worship. Hare Krishna. So thank you again for coming today to Srimad Bhagavatam class. I was mentioning how when I read this purport, I chose Achitananda Prabhu to give the class because it speaks about samskaras, and Achitananda Prabhu, he was teaching and studying in the Mayapur Gurukul, which probably is the place where devotees are most expert in these kind of samskaras. Who has been to the Mayapur Gurukul? Okay. So he probably could have told you many things about these samskaras. I brought the books of samskaras. Maybe we can look into this. And otherwise I will just say something that comes to my mind, because I didn't really have time to prepare much. Indirectly, this purport and verse, especially the purport Srila Prabhupada, he actually asks this question, which is interesting. He asks this question, why then did he desire to be transferred to Pitri-loka? So Srila Prabhupada, he basically, in the purport, explains that it's quite unusual, or this question should be coming up if we read this verse. How is it possible that Maharaj Agnidra, who was the son of Maharaj Priyavrata, who himself was a pure devotee, all of a sudden has material desires? Kamaha, he's saying, Pitri-loka kamaha. We know kama means lust, material desire, and Pitri-loka means specifically the desire to be transferred to a place called Pitri-loka. And Srila Prabhupada asks, how is it possible? And then he mentions how Goswami Giridhar, who apparently is somebody who wrote a commentary on Bhagavatam, I never heard of him. It's probably one of the more unknown commentaries of Srimad Bhagavatam. He remarks that Agnidra was born when Maharaj Priyavrata was infatuated by lusty desires. That's why the mentality of Agnidra was lusty. And I'm sure you all remember one very famous pastime in Bhagavatam where a similar thing happened. Where man and woman united, and the mentality was somewhat contaminated by lusty desire, and then the outcome was Diti. Aditi is the other wife, and Diti is the mother of. So she approached Kashyapa Muni at an improper time, in a lusty attitude, and they had sexual intercourse, and what was the outcome? 2 devotees were born. Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu, 2 demons. And we can see in their life they had a very demoniac attitude. So we can see in this case how the time of conception is very important. There is another time which is very important in our life. Which one is that? death. Why? Exactly. Krishna speaks about it in the Bhagavad Gita. Yang vapi smarang bhavam tyachantyante kalevaram tang evaiti konteya sada tat bhava bhavitaha. Krishna says, whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, O son of Kunti, that state he will attain without fail. So we can see that these two times in our life, when we die, is very crucial because it will decide where we go. And then again, if we conceive a child, that's also a very important time where we have to be fixed in our consciousness. And that's why the Vedic culture, the Vedic tradition instructs human beings to follow a certain system of samskara. And Prabhupada mentions here the Garbhadhana samskara, which literally means the seed planting samskara. So when the seed is planted into the womb. I don't know exactly what's the traditional samskara, but does anyone know what is the samskara Srila Prabhupada gave? What he explained, what we should do? Yeah, 50? Each 50 rounds. Yes. Yeah, once I thought it was 64 rounds, but I also heard he was saying something like 50 rounds. And that shows that Srila Prabhupada, he could understand that this science of the transmigration of the soul, it's valid. It doesn't matter if you are in Satya, Treta, Dwapar or Kali Yuga, it always works. But he adjusted the method in a way which is more practical for us. And because we know that in this time and age, Hare Nama, Hare Nama, Hare Nama, Eva Kevalam Kalo Nasteva, Nasteva, Nasteva Gatiranyata, that in this age, the chanting of the holy name is the only way. So then he adjusted the samskara process. And we know an acharya can do that. I remember one time a devotee telling me, he's a grihastha, he himself as a child, and in a kind of condescending way, he was saying, you know, this samskara Srila Prabhupada gave is kind of impractical. And he was saying, how can you chant when you know you're going to have sexual intercourse? You're anyway just going to think about that enjoyment. And he was basically ridiculing this a bit. But that's the whole point, that if we don't chant, then the desire will be mostly purely material, we just want to enjoy. But if we chant, we actually purify our mind. And we see that in our own chanting, hopefully, that when we sit down in the morning and we chant, then all kinds of thoughts and desires will come up. And we feel like, let me drop the japamala immediately and go somewhere else and do whatever I like and feel. But if we are patient and we continue chanting, we all know within 1-2 hours our mind can become purified. And all of a sudden we are able to remember Krishna. And Srila Prabhupada knew this, that's why he gave that samskara. It's very interesting, this science of the transmigration of the soul. So we spoke about now the one point when we conceive a child, but then there is the other side, which then decides where a soul will go. So we have on one hand the time of death, which will decide for each and every one of us where we can go. But then in order to find a proper place, a couple has to conceive a child in a certain consciousness so that that soul can go. So it needs both sides. I have a certain karma, but then I need a destination where I also can come. And of course, that's very complex, and sometimes we wonder, how is it possible? Like, how is it possible that non-devotees conceive devotees and devotees conceive non-devotees, which we see in even in our own lives? And what I thought is very important to remember in this regard is that Krishna speaks in Bhagavad Gita about the 5 factors of action. This is in the 18th chapter, and Krishna says in this verse, Adhishtanam tata karta karanam cha pritag vidham vividascha pritag cheshta daivam chaivatra panchamam. The place of action, the body, number 1, the performer, the various senses, the many different kinds of endeavor, and ultimately the super soul. These are the 5 factors of action. And I just read the purports. It's a short one, but Srila Prabhupada explains. The word adhishtanam refers to the body. The soul within the body is acting to bring about the results of activity and is therefore known as karta, the doer. That the soul is the knower and the doer is stated in the Shruti. Esha hi drashta shrashta. It is also confirmed in the Vedanta Sutra by the verses Gyota eva and Karta shastrarta vatvat. The instruments of actions are the senses, and by the senses the soul acts in various ways. For each and every action there is a different endeavor. But all one's activities depend on the will of the super soul, who is seated within the heart as a friend. The Supreme Lord is the super cause. Under these circumstances, he who is acting in Krishna consciousness under the direction of the super soul situated within the heart is naturally not bound by any activity. Those in complete Krishna consciousness are not ultimately responsible for their actions. Everything is dependent on the Supreme Will, the Super Soul, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It's an interesting point Srila Prabhupada makes, how for a pure devotee the Super Soul is taking over completely. And in this case of Maharaj Priyavrata, we can understand that Maharaj Priyavrata, being a pure devotee, we've heard that in the previous verses, it was the desire of the Super Soul, specifically, because he is pure in mind, but he arranged things in a way that Maharaj Agnidra took birth with this kind of mentality. So it's his desire. And that's the essence of this verse. Shri Jagannath Baladev Subhadramai ki jai, Shri Gornitai ki jai. The essence of this verse is that there is many different factors which contribute to an action in this world, but the ultimate is the Daivam, the Super Soul. So Prabhupada says the Super Soul. And the Super Soul is very simplistic. The Super Soul can also mean the demigods, because the Super Soul is also controlling the demigods. So meaning, the simplistic understanding is that the Super Soul is doing it, but then in a more complex way, the demigods will assist the Super Soul to arrange things in a way so that the result which the Super Soul wants comes about. In the Vedic literature we find this information how different demigods, they control different elements, different parts of our body. For example, we have a demigod controlling our mind, etc. But ultimately, as Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Sarvasya Jaham Ridi Sanivishto Matas Mritir Jnanam Apohanam Cha. So Krishna is in the heart and he will give you the remembrance and the memory and the knowledge and also the forgetfulness. So he will decide what you will remember at the time of death and at the time of sexual intercourse for conceiving a child. Just yesterday we were speaking, Ajitananda Prabhu and me, to give an example of a person who leaves his body. And I will not mention too many details because this was kind of told to both of us from a friend. Both of us, it's a friend of us who is doing past life regressions. You know, there's a technique how you can go in your past, in your subconscious, and you can access your past life. And this devotee was contacted by some devotee parents, and they were complaining about their child who was very much disinclined to devotional service. Not disinclined, but not really interested, but at the same time very much inclined to a very specific action, some kind of sport. And so they were asking him, you know, if he can help, and so he did a past life regression with this child. And when the child went into the past life, he could see himself playing the same sport, and he could see he was playing on a field, and he was seeing very famous sportsmen, which we all know in today's world. They're like most famous sportsmen. And then he saw another scene, how he saw his own body in this kind of body where you play that sport. And then he looked in the mirror and he said, I know this person. From even in this life, because that person is some kind of famous sportsman. And so we were talking about this because both of us, we got to know about it separately. But then he told me, I have to show you something. And he showed me the picture of this person in this life and the picture of that person in the past life, because we could, even I found that person when I was looking on it, and we were both like, you could just see it's the same person. You know, really, it's like we were going like back and forth for 100 times, like, oh my God, how is it possible? The same eyes, the very similar type of face. And these kind of examples, we also heard a few weeks back of this example of the brahmachari in Wales or Scotland who took birth again as a woman in England, and then he started to remember how he knew the devotees and he knew certain places, and then he found out who he was in his previous life. So these things it's actually everyday life, but we are not so aware of it, how this transmigration of the soul is really happening. But we should know, we should understand this, and in this way we can act properly, we can act accordingly. And how should we act? We should act in a way, first of all we should understand what is the goal. The goal is not to come here again. The goal is also not, as Srila Prabhupada says, to go to Pitri Loka, to some planet in the heavenly planets. And why not? Because Kshine Punya Martya Lokam Vishanti. Even you go to the best place in this universe, at one point your punya, your pious activities will be over and you have to come back. But we want to go to the spiritual world. We want to go to the place where we can have an eternal life in the association of Sri Krishna and his associates, and where we can have a relationship with him, a personal relationship, and where we can have a loving exchange with him. And Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita how we can do this. He says that if we remember him at the time of death, then we will go to him. But as we just see and heard, that it's not that I can decide at the time of death what I will think of. It's not really... Of course we endeavor, we want to, and that's what we do. When a devotee leaves, then all the other devotees support him by chanting the holy name, by reading Srila Prabhupada's books to him or her, in order to bring about this Krishna consciousness in the mind. But ultimately we know that the time of death is so overwhelming usually that we are completely dependent on the mercy of Krishna. But still we should ask ourselves, how can we prepare? And the following verse of this verse, where he says, whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, O son of Kunti, that state he will attain without fail. In the following verse, Krishna gives a very important instruction. He says, Tasmat sarveshu kaleshu mam anusmara yudhya cha mai arpita mano buddhir mam evaishyasya asangshayaha. Therefore, Arjuna, you should always think of me in the form of Krishna, and at the same time carry out your prescribed duty of fighting. With your activities dedicated to me, and your mind and intelligence fixed on me, you will attain me without doubt. This is 8:7. Krishna says that if you want to remember him at the time of death and then be transferred to the spiritual world, what you have to do is, in this life, whatever you do, wherever you are, you should always think of him. And Prabhupada is very particular in the translation, you should think of me in the form of Krishna. And we can ask ourselves, how much do we remember the form of Krishna in our everyday life? And I think mostly it's very frightening to see that we're not thinking so much of the form of Krishna. But this is our practice. So we should ask ourselves the next, how can we remember that form of Krishna? And this has also been given by Srila Prabhupada, the process. It's by hearing about Krishna, by hearing the descriptions of his form, his personality, his activities, and we should worship the deity, because the deity is the form in this material world. And everyone who is worshipping the deity knows, I think Mataji also worshipping in Bangalore deity, right? You're dressing. So I'm sure you can tell much more than me. But we know that when we dress the Lord, we actually get realization about the form of the Lord. Because we touch the Lord, we dress the Lord, we wash him. And when we get very close, we can also speak to the Lord in a very close way. Like when I want to speak to you, usually I approach you, I come to you. It's not that I sit there and I talk to you in this way. Now I can, because I have a microphone and I'm sitting on a Vyasasana. But usually, if I want to talk with someone of you, I come close. And so we should be very much eager to become pujaris. Maybe we don't have so much attraction now, but we should try. And Srila Prabhupada was so merciful that he gave the opportunity to each and every one. Initially in India, only men were allowed to worship the deities, and also the Brahmins usually were doing. But then Bhaktisiddhanta, he already started to initiate so-called non-Brahmins, at least who were not born in a Brahmin family. But he was following the proper understanding that if somebody has the qualification, then he will give the initiation. And Srila Prabhupada extended it. He gave it to each and everyone who wanted to worship deities and who showed some qualification, even the Matajis. So we should really be eager to become qualified, to Bhakti Shastri. Take first initiation, take second initiation, and go on the altar and worship the Lord. And when we do these two things, then by hearing about Him and by worshipping Him directly in His deity form, then slowly we start to think of the Lord as a real person. So when we read about Krishna book, all of a sudden we understand who is Baladev. What is Baladev doing? Oh, Baladev became so angry when Arjuna kidnapped Subhadra and he wanted to kill Arjuna. And we hear all these descriptions and it becomes very personal. Or when we hear about Krishna in Krishna book, how he lived in Dwaraka, this is Jagannath. How he was always feeling separation from Vrindavan. Or when we read Chaitanya Charitamrita, how Lord Gauranga and Nityananda, they would live in Navadvip and then later on they would travel all over India and preach. That's how we... It's a very logical and practical approach, but we have to engage in it. And Srila Prabhupada instructed that we should read Krishna book every evening. We can think, oh, this is, just some random instruction he has given because he wrote the book, so we should read them. But why? Because in the evening, the morning and the evening are very important times, because that's where we can give a very valuable input to our mind. Whatever we remember at the time before sleeping, we usually remember in the morning, and whatever we remember in the morning, we usually remember throughout the day. So they call it the sandwich program Prabhupada gave. The morning program and the evening program. And the Krishna book is something we should really take to heart and do it. Srila Prabhupada, he gave it in the very beginning because he knew that this is the goal of our practice, to remember Krishna as a person and not Brahman or Paramatma or Varahadev or Kurmadev. We read about them, but ultimately our goal has been given to us by our acharyas. We want to go to Goloka Vrindavan and become a servant of Radha Krishna. And we should be faithful that even now I don't have this realization of Krishna. I don't have this relationship and I don't really understand the form. That simply by engaging in the process, by following the instructions of Srila Prabhupada, it will be revealed to us. It's a matter of revelation. And we can think about what it means, revelation. Revelation means it's not something we achieve. It's something which is given to us because we attract the mercy. And we see in our practice, when we read the Krishna book on the first day we came to the temple, it was a little difficult. But after some years, when we read Krishna book, all of a sudden we actually, a whole dimension of spiritual reality opens up. We can see how it increases if we do it. And there is no doubt that when we do it continuously, our whole lifetime, at one point we can see Krishna face to face. And that's our practice. But we have to do it, we have to engage in it, we have to worship the deity, we have to hear about the Lord, and then He will reveal. He will not do it otherwise, because we have to show Him that we want to know Him and we want to engage in relationship with Him. So thank you very much for your attention. It's already 8:30. Forgive me if it was a little bit not so structured. And if you have any comments or questions. Otherwise, those who want to go, we usually finish at 8:30. Yes, Prabhu.
I watched one short videos. There's lots of videos about people who had that playing for that. They came back and there was one person. He was not. He was not. He told his experience was like after leaving body, many people witnessed that. They saw the tunnel and the light at the end of the tunnel. And he said, if you accept to go to that tunnel, to that light, that means that you will be born in this planet Earth. And if you turn back, he said, then if you choose other side, not to go to the light, then you go to space. He didn't mention spiritual, probably not material space, because he said we are multidimensional beings. So my question is that possible that after that we have choice? So it is reincarnation. You are still in this material world. So you will be born here on Earth or somewhere.
The question is that if we die, then we basically we leave this body. We have a choice if we go.
Considering his explanation of what I said, about
that. The question is if we have a choice where to go once we die.
Because he said if you choose to follow the light, that will be planet Earth. If you turn back, so if your back is opposite, you go.
Yeah. Yeah, in one sense, when we hear these statements in Bhagavad Gita, it could kind of suggest that it's a very mechanical. No, you die, then what you think, and you go there. But we also hear some instances in our scripture how it is more complex, like Ajamil is a story where we can see there is some, not really a choice, but there is some moments where even personalities come and decide now where he's gonna go. And I don't know, it's probably very complex and individual. Like when I travel from here to India, then even though we all, it's more or less the same way, but how the journey is very individual for each and every one. So in my understanding, or what I would speculate, is that it's very complex and very individual what will happen, but it's also according to karma. It's always karma. Or for a pure devotee, the Supreme Lord who intervenes directly, like with Ajamil, the Vishnudutas who were sent by the Lord. But if that's not the case, then it's just strictly to karma. So even that we have two choices is according to karma. If we don't have a choice, it's our karma. So it has to be in that boundary of karma. But to really answer this question, we heard many times about this light and tunnel. I also heard about it, but I don't know. I never experienced it myself, and I don't know anything from the Shastra, particularly. Maybe somebody else knows.
I just think we should not too much worry about that. It's more like to focus on the sadhana, the practice, and not worry about so much about the future or the past. I think it's more important to be in the present and
Very good, yeah.
focus on what you can do now. And
Yeah,
because otherwise it's speculation.
definitely, yeah. There is a very beautiful verse by Bhaktivinoda. I don't remember exactly, but he says something like, don't worry about the past, which is asleep, and don't worry about the future, which is like a dream, but be in the present and do what is necessary now. So that's our whole philosophy, that Raja, Tamagun, they always pull us in future and back, but Sattva means I'm in the present, and I can only surrender to the Lord now and here. I cannot do it tomorrow, and I cannot do it yesterday. I can do it tomorrow, but tomorrow it also has to happen in the moment, in the present. And Srila Prabhupada, he was not very encouraging devotees to go into these things too much, because he knows how it can distract. But he just said surrender. And that's the mood of a devotee. Nadanamna janamna sundarim kavitam va jagadisha kamae mama janmani jamanishvare bhavatat bhakti rahaitu kitvai. Let me just take birth again, I don't mind. As long as I can serve you, I'm fine. As long as I can come back to New Jagannath Puri, to dress the Lord, to cook, to clean the temple, to serve the devotees, let me come here, I don't mind. Right? But Prabhupada also says in this verse, he desires to be immediately transferred back home, back to Godhead. So there has to be a desire to go to the spiritual world, definitely, especially in our stage. Okay, thank you very much. Yamuna, you're? Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. I really like the point that you said actually at the end Krishna decides what we are thinking of, and we really have to surrender to him, because there will never be a point where we can be sure that actually we will achieve Krishna. And then you gave this verse, Gita 8.7, and how we should meditate on Krishna's form all the time, and at the same time perform our duties. And I think it's like, also if you really do complex things like fighting, then it's practically possible to see Krishna, like remember Krishna's form and still really be in the present and doing the duty. So it's also that Krishna's form is like standing in other things, like also the people that you're doing, or is really you have to do things in Krishna's form?
It sounds quite impossible, no? To do that. And we hear many impossible things in our scriptures. One of the most impossible things I find is that we hear how one personality can be in two Leelas of the Lord simultaneously, in Gaura Leela and Krishna Leela. So it's inconceivable, but at the same time we can have faith that yes, it must be possible. And it has something to do with Krishna consciousness. How much do you see disconnected to Krishna? And for us neophytes, many things seem to be very disconnected. Actually, we almost see nothing connected to Krishna, unfortunately. But a pure devotee, like Srila Prabhupada, he gave this example of the vision of a pure devotee when he was in Kolkata, and there was a war, and the Chinese, I think, they attacked, and there was a question of leaving the city because they were throwing bombs. He was saying, let us stay here, and when the bomb comes, we will just look up and see the bomb as Krishna coming. So a pure devotee can connect everything to Krishna if he's fighting on a battlefield. And how it really happens in such a situation, I cannot say. I don't know from practical experience. But what I can say in my personal experience, I see how things which I couldn't connect before, I can connect now. And I have somehow the faith that if I follow the process, at one point, what is actually written in the scripture, there's a pure devotee is 24 hours thinking of the Lord, is possible. Now I don't understand how, but I'm 100% sure it must be possible. For several reasons I think it must be possible.
What I was thinking of is that Krishna is different forms, so he's always telling us what he is actually. You can see no longer actually everything is Krishna, and also with the bomb. If the shape or whatever reminds you of Chandra,
Yeah. One example I found in my personal study also is, I heard this devotee was saying that reading about Krishna outside of Vrindavan is not really so attractive to them, because we worship Krishna in Vrindavan. But my personal experience was, when I was reading, I remember reading about Krishna and Rukmini. At one point this thought came, Srimati Radharani was also on the planet at that time, and she must have heard about this somehow. So this was for me a very good example how I could see that thought about Krishna and Vrindavan and Srimati Radharani and the devotees there, where we aspire to go there and serve in that mood, how it can connect to there. And that's how we can connect each and everything, but even Nishingadev and Kurmadev, and a pure devotee of Krishna and Vrindavan can connect everything. And when I hear devotees saying that they don't want to hear about this, or they cannot relate to this because they are worshipping Krishna and Vrindavan, I'm not sure if that's really Krishna consciousness in full. Because a pure devotee can see everything connected to. And so that's what I wanted to say. I from my personal experience, I see how over time things which I couldn't see the connection, Krishna reveals himself in a certain aspect, and I can see his presence, feel his presence more. And our process leads to seeing everything connected to him all the time. So thank you again, and Hare Krishna. Srila Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai.
Yeah, sure.
Because you stay in
Europe.
Europe, yeah, and you moved there when?
Almost I was in place.
Yeah.
From long story.